With trembling hands wrapped around rusted fence posts and foreclosure notices crumpled in her pocket, Emily Cooper reluctantly surveyed what remained of her estranged uncle's metal yard. The inheritance she'd dismissed as worthless might be her last chance to save the struggling family farm, but buried beneath decades of twisted metal and forgotten machinery lay a Prohibition-era secret that would shake the foundations of Riverdale and expose the corrupt legacy of its most powerful family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The July heat was merciless as Emily Cooper navigated her weathered pickup truck along the dusty back roads of Riverdale County. Tall weeds and abandoned equipment dotted the landscape that had once been thriving farmland, now mostly surrendered to corporate agriculture and economic hardship. This forgotten stretch of rural America hadn't seen prosperity since long before the 2008 recession, and the pandemic had only deepened the wounds. Emily hadn't planned on inheriting a metal yard. Her small family farm was already hanging by a thread, one bad season away from bankruptcy despite her relentless efforts. The unexpected call from a lawyer 3 days ago had been the latest in a string of unwelcome complications. "Your Uncle Benjamin Cooper has passed away," the attorney had informed her with clinical detachment. "Despite your estrangement, he's left his metal salvage business to you." The estrangement was lawyer speak for a bitter 20-year family feud. Uncle Ben had quarreled viciously with Emily's father over land and legacy, taking their dispute to such extremes that family gatherings had permanently fractured. The specific reasons were never fully explained to Emily, just vague references to old business and her father's tight-lipped warning that some folks can't be trusted when money's involved. Now at 35, with her father 4 years in the grave and her mother relocated to Florida for her health, Emily was expected to deal with the abandoned property. According to the attorney, it was a weekend job to clear it out and prepare it for a quick sale, the proceeds barely enough to keep her own farm afloat for another season. Another burden on shoulders already carrying too much weight. Cooper's metal recovery appeared through a haze of summer dust as Emily rounded the final bend. A sprawling 10-acre lot surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with faded, peeling signage that had once proudly announced Ben Cooper's treasure trove to passing motorists. In her childhood memories, it had seemed an endless wonderland of fascinating objects and mysterious treasures. Now it just looked like what it was, a graveyard of broken machines and forgotten steel. Emily parked her truck beside the small office building and stepped out into the oppressive heat. Rust-spotted vehicles formed uneven rows that stretched into the distance. Stacks of mysterious machinery parts created small mountains throughout the property. The office itself, a squat cinder block structure, appeared as neglected as everything else, its windows clouded with years of grime. The ancient padlock surrendered to the key with a reluctant groan, and the door swung open with a haunting creak. The musty scent of abandonment greeted her dust, old paper, motor oil, and something else she couldn't quite place. Emily fumbled for a light switch, surprised when the overhead fixture actually flickered to life. The attorney had mentioned that basic utilities had been maintained, but she'd been skeptical. The office interior was like stepping into a time capsule. A heavy metal desk covered with papers and invoices. Filing cabinets with drawers partially open. A calendar on the wall from 5 years ago. Everything layered with dust but otherwise untouched, as if her uncle had simply stepped out for lunch rather than passed away after years of declining health in a veteran's home. "One weekend isn't going to cut it," she muttered, running a finger along a dusty shelf lined with odd mechanical parts and curiosities her uncle had apparently considered worth displaying. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rational choice would be to call the attorney immediately, explain this was far more than she'd agreed to handle, hire an auction service to liquidate everything, and never look back. Yet something held her there. Perhaps curiosity about the uncle she barely remembered, or the nagging questions about why her family had severed ties so completely, or maybe just the desperate need for any potential financial lifeline for her own struggling operation. As daylight began its slow retreat, Emily decided to stay the night. She'd brought camping supplies in her truck, a small tent, sleeping bag, and cooler with food and water. Setting up in the office seemed preferable to pitching the tent in the yard. She found a relatively clean spot, unrolled her sleeping bag, and ate a simple dinner of sandwich and chips. As evening descended, drawn by a lifetime of farmers' curiosity about machinery, Emily began exploring the nearest rows of salvage. Most items were mundane rusted-out tractors, ancient refrigerators, car frames from the 1970s and 80s picked clean of useful parts. But her uncle had been strangely organized in his chaos. Similar items grouped together, pathways maintained between sections, even faded handwritten signs indicating what might be found in each row. Electronics, farm equipment, pre-war vehicles, household, heavy machinery. Read the weathered signposts, some barely legible after years of sun exposure. Emily's attention was caught by the pre-war designation. While her uncle was a Vietnam veteran, some of this salvage looked far older. As darkness fell completely, Emily returned to the office, flashlight in hand. Perhaps her uncle's paperwork would offer clues about anything of value amid the acres of junk. Most documents were mundane utility bills, equipment records, purchase receipts. But as she sorted through them, Emily found a leather-bound ledger wedged beneath a stack of automotive catalogs. The book was worn, its pages yellowed with age. Opening it, she recognized her uncle's handwriting, the same slanted script from the birthday cards he'd sent before the estrangement. The ledger entries dated back 40 years, chronicling the yard's acquisitions with meticulous detail, often noting where items came from and their potential value. Emily flipped forward, looking for entries around the time her family had left. There was a gap several months with no entries, and then a single page with just one line. Blackwell Estate purchase complete. Equipment moved to East Corner. Special instructions followed. Intrigued, Emily continued reading. The subsequent entries became increasingly cryptic, with references to the East Corner project and verifying the Blackwell claims. One entry simply stated, "Ground-penetrating radar confirms dimensions match the blueprints." As she closed the ledger, her elbow knocked a small metal box from the desk. Bending to retrieve it, Emily noticed something odd about the floorboards where the box had landed. One board seemed slightly different from the others, the grain pattern inconsistent, the edges more precisely cut. Heart suddenly racing with the universal human response to potential hidden things, Emily pressed her fingers against it and felt a slight give. She applied more pressure to one end of the board, and it pivoted upward, revealing a small hollow space beneath the floor. Inside was a brass key unlike any modern one she'd seen large, with an intricate pattern and a complex bit at the end, the kind of key that opened something old and significant. Emily held it up in the beam of her flashlight. There was no indication of what it might unlock, but its careful concealment suggested importance. She ran her thumb over the ornate engravings, a series of symbols that looked vaguely like bank insignias, but nothing she could immediately identify. Outside, the sounds of the rural night intensified crickets and distant coyotes, creating nature's soundtrack. In the distance, headlights briefly illuminated the entrance to the metal yard as a vehicle passed on the main road, reminding Emily of how isolated she was among these towers of forgotten metal. She returned her attention to the key, wondering what lock it might fit. The metal yard had standard padlocks, nothing that would require such an elaborate key. Perhaps it opened some old safe or storage container among the countless items outside. Emily slipped the key into her pocket and continued searching the office. In a drawer beneath stacks of receipts, she found a small notebook different from the ledger, more like a personal journal. Inside were handwritten entries spanning decades, some pages containing newspaper clippings carefully preserved with yellowing tape. The earliest entries described her uncle's return from Vietnam, his purchase of the salvage business, and early struggles to make it profitable. But midway through, the tone changed dramatically. An entry from 1985 caught her eye. Old man Blackwell finally passed. His children eager to sell his farm equipment. But it's the story he told me last year that won't leave me alone. If even half of it is true, what's buried on his property could change everything. The first national bank robbery of 1921, the safe that disappeared, the missing Prohibition-era fortune. Everyone thought it was myths, but Blackwell swore his father helped hide it. Said it's been sitting beneath junk and earth for decades, worth the gamble to buy everything from his estate. Emily's heart raced as she read further. Subsequent entries documented her uncle's methodical investigation, tracking down old newspaper articles about the famous unsolved bank robbery, interviewing elderly residents about local legends, and finally secretly using ground-penetrating radar on the east corner of the metal yard. A newspaper clipping from 1921, headlined "Daring Bank Heist Shocks Riverdale," described how thieves had somehow removed an entire bank safe containing loan notes, cash, and safety deposit boxes during the early days of Prohibition. The safe and its contents, estimated to be worth millions in today's money, had never been recovered. They think it was an inside job, one article read. Bank President William Marshall disappeared the same night, presumed to have fled with the thieves. The most shocking detail: the entire 2-ton safe was somehow removed without disturbing the building around it. The final entry in the journal, dated just before Emily's family's estrangement, read, "I'm certain it's there." The radar shows a large, square metallic object, dimensions matching the old bank safe specifications, buried 12 feet down beneath layers of farm equipment and soil. I've started laying the groundwork for excavation, but this needs to be handled carefully. Too many powerful families in this town have connections to what happened in 1921. Marshalls still own half the county if they learn what's buried here. The entry ended abruptly. The remaining pages were blank. Emily sat back, mind reeling. Was this why her uncle and father had fallen out? Did her father believe this treasure hunt was madness? Or was there something darker? Had someone pressured her father to distance the family from Uncle Ben's dangerous historical digging? She reached for her phone to search for information about the Riverdale bank heist of 1921, but there was no signal inside the metal office building. Tomorrow she would need to investigate further, starting with finding the east corner her uncle had referenced repeatedly. Morning arrived with merciless summer heat already building by 7 a.m. After a quick breakfast from her cooler, Emily studied the property layout. The metal yard formed a rough rectangle with the office near the entrance on the south side. The east corner would be the furthest point diagonally from where she stood. Grabbing her uncle's journal, the mysterious key, and a bottle of water, Emily began navigating through the labyrinth of junk. The pathways grew narrower and less maintained as she moved deeper into the property. Some areas required her to squeeze between precariously stacked washing machines or clamber over immobile tractors consumed by weeds and rust. After nearly 30 minutes of careful navigation, Emily reached what had to be the east corner. Unlike the relatively organized sections near the entrance, this area appeared deliberately chaotic. Ancient farming equipment, threshers, plows, and harvesters from the 1940s and 50s had been arranged in a rough circle around a central clearing approximately 30 feet in diameter. In the clearing stood a single piece of equipment, a massive rusted digger that appeared to date from the 1960s. Its mechanical arm extended upward at a slight angle, hydraulic lines hanging uselessly. The ground beneath the digger was different from the rest of the yard, not the hard-packed dirt and gravel, but softer soil with sparse weeds. This had to be it, the location her uncle had identified. But digging 12 feet down would require heavy equipment and expertise Emily didn't possess. Even if she could operate the ancient digger, it wasn't designed for such precise excavation work. As she stood contemplating her next move, the sound of tires on gravel reached her. Someone had driven into the metal yard. Instinctively, Emily ducked behind a rusted combine harvester, suddenly aware that she had no idea who might be looking for her uncle's property or what might be buried beneath it. Through gaps in the machinery, she watched as a black SUV with tinted windows parked near the office. Two men in expensive suits emerged, one older with silver hair, perhaps in his 60s, the other younger, athletically built, scanning the yard with practiced efficiency. The older man held what appeared to be legal documents. "Miss Cooper," the older man called out. "We know you're here. Your truck is parked outside. I'm Edward Marshall, president of First Riverdale Bank. We have a business proposition regarding your inheritance." Marshall, the same family name as the bank president who disappeared in 1921. Emily's mind raced, connecting her uncle's journal entries with these unexpected visitors. Whatever was buried here, the Marshall family apparently knew about it too, and had for generations. Emily remained hidden, watching as the younger man began methodically checking the office and nearby areas. She couldn't stay concealed forever in the sprawling junkyard, but something told her revealing herself immediately would be a mistake. These men hadn't come with friendly intentions, not at 7:30 a.m. to a property they shouldn't even know she was visiting. The key in her pocket suddenly felt heavier, more significant. Whatever her uncle had discovered had drawn the attention of the most powerful family in the county. And now Emily found herself at the center of a mystery that had remained buried literally for nearly a century. Across the metal yard, Edward Marshall removed his sunglasses and surveyed the mountains of scrap with obvious distaste. "Your uncle was a stubborn man, Miss Cooper," he called out, voice carrying across the quiet yard. "He refused a very generous offer for this property. We're prepared to extend that same offer to you, in fact, to improve upon it substantially. 3 times the market value, in cash. You could save your family farm with what we're offering." The mention of her struggling farm sent a chill through Emily. They'd done their research on her financial situation. They knew exactly what leverage to apply. But how had they known she would be here today? Unless someone from the attorney's office had informed them. Emily's mind raced through options. The east corner was far enough from the entrance that she might be able to circle around through the maze of junk and reach her truck undetected. But then what? Run away and abandon what might be the answer to her financial problems buried 12 feet below. The younger man returned to Marshall's side, shaking his head. "Office is empty." "She must be somewhere in the yard," he reported, just loud enough for Emily to hear. "Miss Cooper," Marshall called again, his tone shifting from friendly to businesslike. "Your uncle spent years chasing myths and legends. There's nothing of value here except the land itself, which my bank is prepared to purchase immediately. Let's not waste each other's time." Emily took a deep breath, weighing her options. Whatever her uncle had discovered was valuable enough that the Marshall family had been trying to acquire this property for years. Walking away meant surrendering not just potential treasure, but answers about her family's history and the rift that had divided them. Decision made, she slipped deeper into the labyrinth of salvage, determined to find a way to uncover what lay beneath the innocent-looking patch of soil in the east corner, and the truth about what had happened in Riverdale all those years ago. The treasure hunt her uncle had started was now hers to finish, with the descendants of those involved in the original 1921 heist circling, ever closer and millions potentially at stake. And somewhere, 12 feet below the surface, a nearly century-old bank safe waited to reveal its secrets to whoever reached it first. Emily crouched lower behind the rusted combine harvester, grateful for the maze of junk that offered countless hiding places. She needed to think. Running would mean abandoning whatever lay buried here. Confronting Marshall directly seemed unwise without knowing his true intentions. She needed leverage, or at least information. As the two men continued searching the property's southern section, Emily took the opportunity to examine the clearing more closely. The soil here was different, disturbed decades ago, and never properly settled. Her uncle's journal had mentioned ground-penetrating radar, confirming something large and metallic 12 feet down. If only she had access to such equipment now. Her gaze settled on the ancient digger positioned at the edge of the clearing. It had been deliberately placed here, not randomly abandoned like other equipment. Emily approached it cautiously, noticing now that while the digger appeared rusted and decrepit from a distance, certain mechanical components looked surprisingly well maintained. The operator's cabin was locked, a modern padlock securing the door. Emily withdrew the brass key from her pocket, studying it again. Too ornate for this simple lock, but perhaps. She examined the control panel visible through the cabin window. Unlike the rest of the digger, it had been retrofitted with newer components. Near the bottom of the panel was something unusual, an antique brass plate with a keyhole that matched the style of her key. Before she could investigate further, voices approached. Marshall and his associate were working their way toward the east corner. Emily ducked behind a stack of metal drums, listening. "Your uncle was more resourceful than we gave him credit for," Marshall was saying. "The old fool actually figured it out. Ground-penetrating radar, historical research, he even tracked down the original bank blueprints. Should we call in the excavation team now?" the younger man asked. "Not yet, James. We need to secure legal ownership first. Find the Cooper woman. Get her signature on these papers. If she refuses, we have other options." The casual mention of other options sent a chill through Emily. These weren't simply businessmen making an offer. There was something predatory in their pursuit. When their footsteps faded toward another section of the yard, Emily seized her opportunity. She darted to the digger cabin, broke the modern padlock with a nearby piece of rebar, and slipped inside. The interior was surprisingly clean, recently used. The brass keyhole beckoned. Emily inserted the ornate key, holding her breath. It turned smoothly, and the control panel hummed to life. Not just an ignition. This activated something else entirely. A small compartment beneath the seat popped open, revealing a leather folder. Inside was a complete operational manual for the digger, handwritten by her uncle, along with detailed notes on what lay beneath the soil. Depression-era bank safe, his notes confirmed. First National Bank of Riverdale. Stolen October 25, 1921. Contains estimated $1.2 million in cash, 1921 value. Gold certificates, property deeds, and safety deposit boxes belonging to 12 local families. Current value impossible to calculate, potentially tens of millions. Excavation preparations complete. Digger operational. Blackwell story confirmed. Tucked behind these notes was a black and white photograph from 1921 showing the original bank president, William Marshall, standing proudly before the safe. The resemblance to the man currently searching the metal yard was unmistakable. Safe secured with dual key system, her uncle's notes continued. Primary key recovered from Blackwell estate. Second key allegedly in possession of Marshall family, passed down through generations. Both required to access contents. Emily's hand tightened around the brass key. She held one of the two keys necessary to open the safe, if they could reach it. No wonder Edward Marshall was here. He likely had the second key but needed her property to access what was buried. The sound of the SUV's engine starting made her peek through the dirty digger window. Marshall and James appeared to be leaving, though Emily suspected they wouldn't go far. This was just a tactical retreat. Once they disappeared down the access road, Emily studied the digger controls more carefully. According to her uncle's notes, He had maintained the equipment specifically for this purpose, excavating the safe. The control panel featured standard levers for the arm and bucket, but also included a modified attachment her uncle had designed, a specialized digging mechanism. "Miss Cooper," the voice behind her made Emily freeze. Standing in the digger cabin doorway was a woman perhaps in her 70s, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her posture straight despite her age. "I'm Margaret Blackwell," she said simply. "I believe you found my father's legacy." Margaret Blackwell had arrived in a dusty pickup truck, approaching on foot through the salvage maze with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the layout intimately. "I saw Marshall's vehicle leaving," she explained, climbing into the digger cabin beside Emily. "I've been watching this place for decades, ever since your uncle bought my father's equipment. I knew this day would come eventually." Emily studied the elderly woman warily. "You're related to the Blackwell mentioned in my uncle's journal." Margaret nodded. "Thomas Blackwell was my father. He helped hide that safe in 1921, along with others who were trying to keep the town's wealth from disappearing during Prohibition. The bank president, William Marshall, had been secretly embezzling for years. When Prohibition created new opportunities for profit, he planned to flee with everything people's life savings, their loan notes, property deeds, family heirlooms stored in safety deposit boxes. "My uncle believed the safe is buried right here," Emily said, gesturing toward the clearing. "It is," Margaret confirmed. "My father was part of a group that intercepted Marshall and his associates as they were loading the safe onto a train. They brought it here, then just an unused field, and buried it for safekeeping. The plan was to return the contents to their rightful owners once things settled down, but that never happened." Margaret's weathered face hardened. "William Marshall was found dead a week later. The authorities blamed the men who'd stopped the theft. 3 were hanged, including my grandfather. The others scattered, taking their knowledge of the safe's location with them. My father kept silent to stay alive, especially after William's son took control of the bank and most of the town. And the Marshall family has been searching for it ever since," Emily concluded. "For generations, they've known it was somewhere on this original property, but couldn't pinpoint the location. Your uncle was the first to use modern technology to confirm exactly where." Emily held up the brass key. "This opens the safe half of the locking mechanism?" Margaret confirmed. "A 2-key system was standard for bank safes then. Then William Marshall would have had the other key, which his family likely still possesses," Emily realized. "That's why Edward Marshall wants this property so badly." Margaret nodded grimly. "They've tried buying every parcel of the original land over the years. Your uncle was the only owner who refused to sell and who actually figured out what was here." "Why are you telling me all this?" Emily asked. "Because I made a promise to my father before he died. If that safe was ever found, its contents should be returned to the descendants of the original owners, not claimed by the Marshalls, who tried to steal it in the first place." Margaret reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a folded document. "This is a list of the families who had safety deposit boxes and accounts at First National in IVVF 1921. Your own great-grandparents are on it." Emily took the paper with trembling hands. They were at the bottom: Cooper, Samuel, and Eleanor. Farm loan note, $800, and family jewelry. "That loan note ruined my father's family during the Depression," Margaret explained. "With the bank records gone, the Marshall family claimed the Coopers still owed the debt, plus interest. They eventually took half the original Cooper farmland as payment. Your family history and mine are bound together by what's buried here." The implications staggered Emily, her family's financial struggles through the generations, the lost land, even her current predicament with the farm, all potentially stemming from that buried safe and its contents. "We need to excavate it before Marshall returns," Emily decided, turning to the digger controls. "Do you know how to operate this equipment?" Margaret asked dubiously. "No," Emily admitted. But my uncle left detailed instructions, and I grew up running farm machinery. It can't be that different. The next hour passed in intense concentration. Following her uncle's handwritten manual, Emily powered up the digger's diesel engine, remarkably well maintained, despite its age. The specialized digging attachment was essentially a massive drill combined with a clamshell bucket, designed to remove earth without damaging what lay beneath. "Marshall will hear the engine," Margaret warned, keeping watch through binoculars. "Then we work fast," Emily replied, carefully maneuvering the arm into position. "How long do you think this will take?" Your uncle estimated 6 hours of continuous digging to reach 12 feet. Less if we're lucky with soil conditions. 6 hours they didn't have. Marshall would return long before then, possibly with reinforcements. Emily started the excavation, the massive drill bit churning through the topsoil with surprising efficiency. Her uncle's modifications worked better than expected, removing earth in careful measured amounts. By noon, they'd created a pit nearly 5 feet deep and 8 feet across. "We need help," Emily admitted, pausing to wipe sweat from her forehead. At this rate, they'd reach the safe by nightfall far too late. Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "There are people in town who might help. Descendants of the original families. They've heard the stories passed down through generations. Can you trust them? More importantly, they have every reason to distrust the Marshalls. I'll make some calls." While Margaret stepped away to use her cell phone, Emily continued excavating, pushing the old digger to its limits. The pit grew steadily deeper, revealing layers of soil undisturbed for nearly a century. At the 7-foot mark, the bucket scraped against something metallic. Emily's heart leaped, but it was only an old piece of farm equipment, deliberately placed as camouflage. By early afternoon, the rumble of approaching vehicles made them both tense. But instead of Marshall's sleek SUV, a procession of pickup trucks and work vehicles appeared. Driven by a diverse group of townsfolk, men and women of various ages emerged, carrying shovels, work gloves, and determined expressions. "The Parkers," Margaret introduced, pointing to an elderly man helping his middle-aged son unload equipment. "The Ramirez family. The Johnsons. The Millers. All descendants of original account holders." A burly man in his 60s approached, hand extended. "Jack Parker. My grandfather lost everything when those records disappeared. Been hearing about this safe my whole life. Never thought we'd actually find it." Soon, a coordinated excavation operation was underway. While Emily operated the digger, others formed bucket brigades to remove soil faster than the machine could work alone. Someone brought portable floodlights as the afternoon began to wane. Others established lookouts along the access road. The pit reached 9 feet, then 10. The work was exhausting but energized by collective purpose. These were families who had suffered financial hardship for generations, potentially because of missing loan documents and bank records that proved their debts had been paid. Just after 5 p.m., the digger's bucket struck something solid, a flat metallic surface. A hushed silence fell over the group as Emily carefully cleared away the surrounding soil. Gradually, the top of an enormous steel safe emerged from the earth, once green paint now darkened with age, but the words "First National Bank of Riverdale" still visible in brass lettering. A ragged cheer went up from the assembled workers. Decades of local legend confirmed in an instant. "We need to fully uncover it and figure out how to lift it," Jack Parker said, examining the exposed portion. "That's a 2-ton safe. Even your digger will struggle." As they debated next steps, the lookout's warning call came. Vehicles approaching. Multiple SUVs and a police car. Emily's stomach dropped. Marshall had returned and brought reinforcements, including local law enforcement. Time had run out. "Keep working," she instructed the others, returning to the digger controls. "We need to get this safe out before they shut us down." With renewed urgency, The group cleared the remaining soil from around the safe. It was smaller than modern bank safes, but still massive, approximately 5 feet in each dimension, with a large circular door on one side. The door featured 2 keyholes positioned on opposite sides of a spinning combination dial. As the first vehicles appeared at the metal yard entrance, Emily positioned the digger's hooks around lifting points on the safe. The ancient steel groaned under the tension as she began raising it from its earthen tomb. Edward Marshall emerged from the lead SUV, his face contorted with anger as he took in the scene. Behind him, the local sheriff and several officers approached cautiously, clearly confused by the gathering of prominent local citizens covered in dirt and standing defiantly around a massive hole in the ground. "This is private property," Marshall shouted. "Sheriff, I want everyone here arrested for trespassing and theft." The sheriff, a middle-aged man with a pronounced paunch, looked uncertainly between Marshall and the assembled townsfolk. "Mr. Marshall, most of these folks are respected business owners and taxpayers. What exactly is happening here?" Margaret Blackwell stepped forward. "History being corrected, Sheriff Wilson. This safe was stolen from First National Bank in 1921, and with it, the financial records of half the town. Records that would have proven many debts were paid in full before the theft." "Ridiculous conspiracy theories," Marshall dismissed. "This woman is trespassing, as are all these people. Ms. Cooper signed over this property this morning." All eyes turned to Emily, still in the digger cabin, the massive safe now suspended several feet above the pit. "I signed nothing," she called down. "And according to my uncle's records and witness testimony, this safe contains stolen property belonging to multiple families represented here." The sheriff rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "That old bank robbery. My grandfather used to talk about it. Said it ruined a lot of good families when the records disappeared." "Exactly," Jack Parker joined in. "My family lost their dairy farm because the bank claimed we still owed on a loan my grandfather had paid off. The receipt was in his safety deposit box inside that safe." Similar murmurs came from others in the crowd. The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable. Marshall changed tactics. "This is simple theft. Whatever is in that safe belongs to First Riverdale Bank, my bank. The original owners were compensated through insurance. Sheriff, do your duty." The sheriff hesitated, then shook his head. "This is beyond my jurisdiction. Mr. Marshall, we're talking about a 100-year-old bank robbery with multiple conflicting claims. This needs state investigators and probably historians to sort out ownership. In the meantime," Emily called down, carefully lowering the safe onto solid ground beside the pit, "this safe stays secured until proper authorities determine how to proceed." Marshall's face flushed with fury. "You have no idea what you're involving yourself in, Miss Cooper. My family built this town, and we own this town. And maybe that's been the problem all along," Emily replied steadily, climbing down from the digger. As tensions escalated, a new vehicle arrived, a state police cruiser. From it emerged a serious-looking woman in a business suit, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. "Special Investigator Rachel Chun, State Financial Crimes Unit," she announced, displaying credentials. "We received multiple calls about the discovery of evidence related to the 1921 First National Bank theft. I'm hereby securing this scene pending full investigation." Marshall blanched visibly. "This is a local matter. A bank robbery is federal jurisdiction, Mr. Marshall," Chun corrected. "Especially one involving negotiable instruments, gold certificates, and safety deposit contents. My team will secure the safe until federal agents arrive." As the state officers established a perimeter, Emily approached the safe with Margaret at her side. The massive circular door, untouched for nearly a century, featured an intricate locking mechanism. "It needs both keys and the correct combination to open," Margaret explained. "The combination died with my father." Marshall, overhearing, gave a thin smile despite his obvious frustration. "Which means we'll need cutting tools to open it," equipment that will take days to arrange. Or, Emily said quietly, withdrawing the brass key from her pocket, we use the keys as intended, along with the combination your ancestor thought no one else knew. Marshall's smile vanished. Impossible. That combination died with my great-grandfather. Not quite, Margaret contradicted. My father was there when they buried the safe. The combination was the date October 25, 1921, the day your ancestor tried to flee with the town's wealth. Investigator Chun stepped forward. I'll need to document this process officially. Both key holders will turn their keys simultaneously while I enter the combination. Everything will be inventoried and secured by my officers. Emily and Marshall faced each other across the safe door, each holding a key that separately was worthless, but together would unlock answers buried for nearly a century. You don't have to do this, Marshall said quietly, for Emily's ears only. Whatever your financial troubles, I can solve them. Name your price. Emily thought of her struggling farm, the generations of hardship her family had endured, the mysterious rift that had separated her father and uncle, all potentially stemming from what lay inside this safe. Some things aren't for sale, Mr. Marshall, she replied, inserting her key into the left-hand lock. Some things are about justice, not profit. With visible reluctance, Marshall inserted his key into the right-hand keyhole. At Chun's signal, they turned simultaneously while she dialed the combination. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a series of metallic clicks as tumblers fell into place for the first time since 1921. The massive handle, frozen for decades, suddenly yielded to Chun's pull. The safe doors swung open with surprising smoothness, revealing contents that had remained hidden and untouched through Prohibition, Depression, war, and nearly a century of searching. Cash in neatly bundled stacks, gold certificates, property deeds, safety deposit boxes arranged in numbered rows, and most damning of all, a handwritten ledger showing loan payments received but never credited, including those from the Cooper, Parker, Blackwell, and a dozen other families represented among the diggers. This changes everything, Chun said quietly, surveying the contents. The legal implications alone will take years to unravel. As Emily stared at the evidence of her great-grandparents' fully paid loan, the debt that had cost her family half their land and burdened generations with financial struggle, she felt a strange sense of completion. Her uncle hadn't been chasing conspiracy theories or buried treasure for its own sake. He'd been searching for truth. The truth that now, finally, in a metal yard on a summer evening, had emerged from the earth after nearly a century of darkness. A truth that would reshape not just her future, but the story of an entire community long controlled by a single family's power and influence. Edward Marshall, ashen-faced as officers began photographing and documenting the safe's contents, seemed to physically diminish before her eyes. A man watching the carefully maintained family myth of respectability crumble in real time. "Your uncle tried to tell my father," Emily said to Margaret as they watched the process unfold. "That's why they fell out. My father must have been afraid of what would happen if they challenged the Marshalls." Margaret nodded. Fear has kept this buried for generations. As twilight descended over Cooper's metal recovery, now bustling with officials and onlookers, Emily realized the property she had reluctantly inherited, the burden she'd planned to liquidate as quickly as possible, had yielded something far more valuable than its market price. It had unearthed justice, long delayed but finally delivered. Dawn broke over the metal yard, casting long shadows across a scene transformed overnight. Yellow police tape created a perimeter around the excavation site. State and federal officials moved with practiced efficiency, cataloging and photographing the safe's contents. News vans lined the access road, reporters gesturing excitedly as they delivered updates to a story rapidly capturing national attention. Emily sat on an overturned crate near her truck, exhausted but unable to rest. The last 12 hours had passed in a blur of official statements, signed affidavits, and endless questions. Her phone battery had died hours ago from the constant stream of calls from journalists, from distant relatives suddenly interested in family history, from bank officials seeking comment. "Coffee?" Margaret said, approaching with a thermos. "You look like you need this more than I do." Emily accepted gratefully. "How are you so calm?" "This is overwhelming." The older woman settled beside her. When you've carried a secret for decades, there's a certain relief in finally seeing it in the light. Like setting down a heavy load you've carried so long you forgot it wasn't part of you. They watched in companionable silence as officials wheeled out a cart loaded with safety deposit boxes, each sealed with evidence tape. What happens now? Emily wondered aloud. Legally? Years of sorting through ownership claims, I expect. The cash and gold certificates technically belong to the bank's insurance company or their successors. The safety deposit contents should go to the descendants of box holders once they're identified. The loan documents. Margaret smiled slightly. Those might be the most valuable items of all for families like yours. Special Investigator Chen approached, clipboard in hand. "Miss Cooper, we've completed the preliminary inventory. I wanted to update you personally since this is technically your property." Chen led them to a folding table where several documents lay protected in clear evidence sleeves. "We found this in a special compartment inside the safe door," she explained, indicating what appeared to be a leather-bound journal. "It appears to be William Marshall's personal record of his activities. A confession, essentially." Emily leaned closer. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, as if written by someone in haste. "October 24th, 1921, Chun read. Marshall documented how he'd been falsifying bank records for years, marking loans as unpaid when they'd been satisfied, claiming properties through foreclosure, then selling them at profit to his associates. When Prohibition created new opportunities for illegal profit, he feared discovery was inevitable, so he planned to disappear with all evidence of his crimes and the town's wealth. But he was betrayed by his accomplices," Margaret added. Chun nodded. "According to his final entry, dated the night of the theft, he was betrayed by his accomplices. They took the safe without him, leaving him behind. He was writing this as he heard them coming to silence him." Emily thought of Edward Marshall's ashen face the previous evening as the safe was opened. Had he known the truth about his great-grandfather? Or had the Marshall family built their dynasty on a carefully constructed lie passed down through generations? "There's something else," Chun continued, sliding forward another document. "This was found with your great-grandparents' loan papers. It's the original deed to the Cooper farmland, all 300 acres, not just the 150 your family currently owns." Emily stared at the yellowed document, its significance slowly sinking in. "Are you saying the foreclosure that cost your family half their land was fraudulent? The loan had been paid in full before the records disappeared. Similar situations for about 24 other families." Chun's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Miss Cooper, this discovery may have significant implications for current property ownership throughout the county." As Chun was called away to consult with federal agents, Emily remained transfixed by the document before her, the land her father had worked himself to exhaustion trying to buy back, the acres her mother still grieved over, where 4 generations of Coopers had planted and harvested before corporate agriculture swallowed the parcels one by one. "Looks like you might end up with more than a metal yard from this inheritance," Margaret observed quietly. "If these records hold up legally," Emily replied, not daring to hope too much. "They will," came a new voice. Jack Parker joined them, his expression solemn but eyes bright with vindication. "My son's a property lawyer. He says documents like these, with clear chain of custody from a bank safe, carry significant legal weight, especially with Marshall's confession contextualizing the circumstances." A commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Edward Marshall had returned, this time accompanied by several men in expensive suits, lawyers undoubtedly. His expression was thunderous as he was stopped at the police line, credentials scrutinized before he was allowed to pass. Marshall made a beeline for Chun, gesturing emphatically as the two engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. After several minutes, Chun shook her head firmly and turned away, leaving Marshall standing alone, fists clenched at his sides. "Round 2 begins," Jack muttered. "The Marshalls won't surrender their power without a fight." As if sensing their attention, Marshall's gaze found Emily. After a moment's hesitation, he approached their small group. "Miss Cooper," he began, his tone carefully controlled, "I'd like to speak with you privately." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my friends," Emily replied evenly. Marshall glanced at Margaret and Jack, then back to Emily. "Very well. I'm authorized to offer you $5 million for this property and all rights to any claims arising from documents found within the safe." The sum was staggering enough to save her farm many times over, to modernize equipment, to live comfortably for the rest of her life. Yet the offer felt hollow, tainted. "And what about the other families?" Emily asked. "The Parkers, the Blackwells, the Ramirez, everyone else whose ancestors lost land and livelihoods because records conveniently disappeared. Their claims are speculative at best," Marshall dismissed. "Yours is the only property with documented evidence of wrongdoing, which is why I'm prepared to settle with you specifically. The others would be best served accepting reality rather than chasing ancient history." The casual cruelty of his statement, dismissing generations of hardship as mere ancient history, crystallized something in Emily. This wasn't just about her farm or her family. It was about a community shaped by an injustice so profound it had altered the trajectory of countless lives. "No," she said simply. Marshall blinked, clearly unaccustomed to rejection. "I don't think you understand the gravity." "I understand perfectly," Emily interrupted. "You're offering to buy my silence, to keep this contained. But these records don't just belong to me. They belong to everyone affected by what your great-grandfather did." "You're making a serious mistake," Marshall warned, his composed veneer cracking. $5 million is more than generous for a failing farmer with a mountain of debt. Emily stood, facing him directly. "You know what's interesting, Mr. Marshall? Yesterday morning, I would have probably taken that offer. I was desperate, scared of losing my family's land. But standing here now, I realize something my uncle understood that my father never did. Some things matter more than money. Principles won't save your farm," he sneered. "Maybe not," Emily acknowledged. "But they might help me sleep at night. And they might help restore what your family has taken from this community over generations." Marshall's face darkened. "Don't romanticize this, Miss Cooper. You've stumbled into matters far beyond your understanding. My family built this county when it was nothing but dirt and desperation. We provided jobs, infrastructure, stability. Built on stolen land and falsified debts," Margaret interjected, her voice steady despite her age. "Built on the broken backs of families who worked twice as hard to replace what was taken from them." "The courts will sort this out," Emily said with finality. "I suggest you prepare your legal team, Mr. Marshall. I suspect you'll need it." As Marshall stormed away, Jack clapped her shoulder. "You just made an enemy for life, young lady. The Marshalls aren't accustomed to defiance." "Maybe that's been the problem all along," Emily replied. Throughout the day, the excavation site transformed into something resembling an archaeological dig. Federal historians joined the investigation, fascinated by the time capsule aspect of the safe's contents. News coverage intensified as the story spread beyond local interest to national networks. By late afternoon, Emily found herself seated in a hastily arranged town hall meeting. The county commissioner, looking distinctly uncomfortable, presided over a gathering of local officials, affected families, and state representatives. "Due to the extraordinary nature of this discovery," the commissioner announced, The governor has authorized formation of a special commission to evaluate all claims arising from the recovered documents. Property disputes, banking records, and personal items will be addressed through appropriate legal channels. A state attorney stood to explain the process. We're establishing a claims office where descendants of the original account holders can register their interest. Documentation will be required to establish lineage, but the recovered records provide substantial verification for many families. From her seat, Emily watched the proceedings with a sense of surreal detachment. 24 hours ago, she had been a struggling farmer dreading a weekend clearing junk. Now she was at the center of what one news outlet had dubbed the safe that changed history. As the meeting progressed, various community members stood to share family stories, tales passed down through generations about land lost, debts doubled, opportunities denied, stories that had shaped the economic landscape of Riverdale County for nearly a century, creating distinct divides between those who prospered and those who merely survived. When the formal presentations concluded, Margaret approached the microphone, her small frame commanding immediate attention. "I've carried the truth about that safe since I was a child," she began, her voice strong despite her years. "My father made me promise to remember, to never let the story die. He believed that someday the truth would emerge." The room fell silent, captivated. "We're not just talking about property deeds and banknotes," Margaret continued. "We're talking about justice delayed by nearly a century. About families who worked twice as hard to replace what was taken. About children who couldn't attend college because their parents were still paying for land that should have been theirs outright." She paused, surveying the room. "But this discovery isn't just about the past. It's about the future we choose to build now that the truth has finally surfaced. Will we perpetuate old divisions, or use this moment to heal wounds that have festered for generations?" As Margaret returned to her seat amid respectful applause, Emily felt a nudge from Jack Parker. "Your turn," he whispered. "People need to hear from you." Emily shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. I just found a key." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Jack replied. "One person willing to turn the key that others have walked past." Reluctantly, Emily made her way to the microphone. The room quieted expectantly. "I'm not good at speeches," she began awkwardly. 3 days ago, I was just trying to keep my farm from foreclosure. I went to clear out my uncle's metal yard, hoping to make enough from the sale to keep the bank at bay for another season." She took a steadying breath. "What I found instead was the culmination of my uncle's lifelong search. A search that cost him relationships, that labeled him eccentric or obsessed. He died believing in something most people dismissed as legend or conspiracy theory." Emily gestured toward the community members seated around her. "But he was right. And his persistence has given all of us a chance to correct a historical wrong that shaped this community for generations. I don't know what happens next legally, but I know that nothing can be the same after today." As she concluded to warm applause, Emily caught sight of Edward Marshall standing at the back of the room, arms crossed, expression inscrutable. Their gazes locked briefly before he turned and exited through a side door. The meeting eventually adjourned with plans for follow-up sessions and the establishment of the claims process. As people filtered out, many stopped to shake Emily's hand or share family stories connected to the 1921 bank incident. "Ms. Cooper," a voice called as Emily finally headed toward the exit. She turned to find Special Investigator Chen approaching with a leather portfolio. "A moment of your time?" They found a quiet corner where Chen opened the portfolio, revealing several documents. "We've completed preliminary authentication of the materials relating specifically to your family," she explained. The Cooper farm loan was indeed paid in full before the bank robbery. According to property laws regarding fraudulent foreclosure, you may have legal claim to the full original acreage. Emily stared at the documents, hardly daring to believe. "The western parcels, the ones my father tried for years to buy back?" Chun nodded. currently owned by Riverdale Agricultural Holdings, a subsidiary of Marshall Enterprises. "They'll fight this," Emily said, thinking of Marshall's cold determination. "Undoubtedly. But you should know something else." Shun extracted another document. "We found this in William Marshall's personal effects from the safe. It appears to be a letter he never sent, addressed to your great-grandfather. The letter, written in the same elegant hand as the confession, expressed remorse for actions taken against Samuel Cooper, specifically for claiming his land remained in debt when Marshall had personally accepted the final payment weeks before Prohibition began. This is as close to a smoking gun as historical documents get," Shen said quietly. "Even the best lawyers will struggle to dispute this evidence." As Emily left the town hall, the setting sun cast long shadows across Riverdale's main street. She drove slowly past the county courthouse with its stately columns, past the first Riverdale bank where it all began, past storefronts and homes whose ownership histories might soon be called into question. Returning to the metal yard, now transformed into an active investigation scene, Emily found Margaret waiting by her pickup truck. "I thought you might want this," the older woman said, holding out a small wooden box. "My father kept it all these years. Hid it along with the safe, but said it shouldn't fall into the wrong hands." Inside the box was a small brass plate identical to the one on the digger's control panel, the keyhole that had activated the hidden compartment. "There are more secrets in that metal yard," Margaret explained. "Your uncle found some, but not all. My father helped hide more than just the safe that night." "More valuables?" Emily asked. Margaret smiled enigmatically. "Different kind of valuable. Records that certain powerful families would rather stayed buried. Records of who really controlled this county, who profited from others' misfortune, who betrayed their neighbors during the hardest times." Emily turned the brass plate over in her hands. "Why give this to me?" "Because you chose justice over personal gain," Margaret said simply. "Because you honored your uncle's search for truth, even when it would have been easier to take the money and walk away." As darkness settled fully over the metal yard, Emily stood among the towering piles of what she had initially dismissed as worthless junk, her inheritance. This property she had resented receiving had yielded something far more valuable than its market price. It had unearthed truth, long buried but stubbornly preserved. It had connected her to her family's past in ways she hadn't anticipated. And perhaps most importantly, it had offered a community the chance to re-examine its foundations, to question the narratives that had shaped its development for nearly a century. Tomorrow would bring legal battles, media scrutiny, and uncertain outcomes. The Marshall family wouldn't surrender their position easily. The process of untangling 100 years of property transfers, banking decisions, and accumulated wealth would be lengthy and complex. But tonight, watching federal agents secure the site where history had literally been unearthed, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just for her farm's future, but for a community that might finally have the opportunity to rebuild on foundations of truth rather than convenient fictions. Her uncle's obsession, long dismissed as eccentricity, had been vindicated. The key she had discovered had unlocked more than a forgotten safe. It had opened possibilities for healing wounds so old most had forgotten they were still bleeding. As Emily turned toward her truck, ready to finally get some rest after the most extraordinary day of her life, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Jack Parker. "Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., all affected families. We need to stand together for what comes next. You in?" Without hesitation, Emily replied, "I'm in." The journey that had begun with a reluctant signature on inheritance papers had transformed into something far bigger than one woman's struggle to save her family farm. It had become about a community reclaiming its history, challenging entrenched power, and daring to imagine a more equitable future. And it had all started with a single brass key hidden beneath the floorboards of a dusty metal yard office, waiting for someone with the courage to turn it. 3 months had passed since the discovery of the safe, yet Riverdale remained in a state of upheaval. Autumn had arrived, painting the countryside in fiery hues that matched the intensity of the ongoing legal battles. The town had been transformed, not just by the physical changes as property boundaries were resurveyed and historical claims processed, but by a fundamental shift in the community's understanding of itself. Emily stood at the edge of her farm, watching a survey team place markers along what would soon be recognized as the restored western boundary of Cooper land. The legal process was moving with surprising speed, accelerated by the irrefutable evidence recovered from the safe. Last week, the state court had issued its first major ruling, affirming the validity of the original loan documents and ordering restoration of wrongfully foreclosed properties to the descendants of rightful owners. "Never thought I'd see this day," remarked Miguel Ramirez, whose family farm bordered what had once been and would soon be again Cooper property. "My grandfather used to point across these fields and tell me that was stolen from the Coopers. Same as our north pasture was stolen from us. Now we're both getting our land back." Emily nodded, still hardly believing it herself. "The Marshalls are appealing, of course." "Let them," Miguel replied with a dismissive wave. "The evidence is too strong, too clear. Even their expensive lawyers can't make William Marshall's confession disappear." As the surveyors packed up their equipment, Emily's phone rang Margaret Blackwell, calling with updates from the town's weekly recovery meeting. The federal authentication team finished processing the safety deposit box contents, the elderly woman reported. "They're ready to begin returning items to confirmed descendants. Your great-grandmother's jewelry is among the first batch. Family heirlooms lost for nearly a century, soon to be back in Cooper hands." The news should have been purely joyful. Yet Emily felt a complex mixture of emotions. Restoration came hand in hand with the pain of recognizing all that had been taken generations, deprived of their rightful inheritance, of financial security, of the knowledge of who they truly were. "There's something else," Margaret continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "Edward Marshall has called a press conference for tomorrow. Rumor has it he's about to make a major announcement regarding the family's banking operations." "Selling the bank and leaving town, I hope," Emily replied, only half joking. "Not likely," Margaret chuckled. "The Marshalls don't surrender territory easily. Just be prepared. Whatever he's planning, it's bound to be a calculated move." After ending the call, Emily drove back toward the farmhouse, passing fields now busy with harvest activity. The financial breathing room provided by the initial court rulings had allowed her to hire seasonal help for the first time in years. The farm wasn't yet profitable, but it was stable, no longer teetering on the edge of foreclosure. As she rounded the final bend in the driveway, Emily was surprised to see a familiar black SUV parked near her porch. Edward Marshall stood beside it, looking decidedly uncomfortable in the rural setting, his polished dress shoes already gathering dust from the unpaved drive. "Miss Cooper," he greeted her, his tone carefully neutral. "I was hoping we might speak privately." Emily parked and approached cautiously. Their last several encounters had been across courtrooms or through lawyers, never directly, and certainly never on her property. "What brings you all the way out here, Mr. Marshall? A proposition?" He gestured toward the porch. "May we sit?" Curiosity overcoming caution, Emily nodded. They settled into the weathered rocking chairs that had been fixtures on the Cooper farm porch for generations. "I'll be direct," Marshall began. "Tomorrow I'm announcing a major restructuring of First Riverdale Bank. We're establishing a community restoration fund, initially $50 million, to compensate families affected by the actions of my great-grandfather." Emily studied him skeptically. "That's unexpected." "It's necessary," he replied, surprising her further. The legal battles could continue for years, draining resources from all sides. This alternative provides immediate financial relief while acknowledging historical wrongs. The bank remains solvent, Affected families receive compensation, and the community begins healing. Why this sudden change of heart? Emily asked, not bothering to hide her suspicion. 3 months ago, you were ready to bury everything literally and figuratively. Marshall was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the rolling farmland stretching toward the horizon. My daughter, he finally said. Rebecca is in her final year at Stanford. When this story broke nationally, she called me. Do you know what she asked? She asked if it was true, if our family fortune was built on stolen land and falsified debts. He shifted uncomfortably. I've spent my life believing in a family legacy of business acumen and financial wisdom. I told myself we earned our position through hard work and strategic thinking. When confronted with evidence to the contrary, my first instinct was to suppress it, to protect that narrative at all costs. And now? Emily prompted when he fell silent again. Now I'm trying to ensure my daughter has a family name she can bear without shame. Marshall extracted a folder from his jacket and placed it on the small table between them. This proposal includes full restoration of all documented wrongfully acquired properties, financial compensation for lost income over generations, and establishment of a community oversight board for the bank moving forward. Emily opened the folder, scanning the detailed documents within. The terms were surprisingly generous, far beyond what courts would likely mandate. Why bring this to me first? I'm not a lawyer or a community representative. Because none of this would be happening without your actions, Marshall admitted reluctantly. When you refused my offer that day, chose justice over immediate financial gain, it forced a reckoning that might otherwise have been buried for another generation. The community will listen to your assessment of this proposal. Emily closed the folder thoughtfully. I'll need time to review this with the others. We'll need guarantees, independent verification, community involvement in implementation. All reasonable requests, Marshall agreed, rising to leave. At the steps he paused. One more thing, your uncle's metal yard. I'd like to purchase it at fair market value. Not for the land, but to preserve what's there, convert it into a historical site documenting this chapter of Riverdale's history. The metal yard isn't for sale, Emily replied automatically. Marshall nodded as if expecting this response. Consider it part of your uncle's legacy, a place where future generations can learn about how one man's persistence ultimately changed the course of an entire community. Think about it. As his SUV disappeared down the driveway, Emily remained on the porch, turning over Marshall's unexpected proposal. Was this genuine atonement or sophisticated damage control? Perhaps elements of both. Her contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Jack Parker's pickup truck, Margaret in the passenger seat. They had planned to examine the brass plate Margaret had given her, to see if it might reveal further secrets within the metal yard. Was that Edward Marshall I passed on the road? Jack asked incredulously as they joined Emily on the porch. She nodded, summarizing Marshall's unexpected proposal and sharing the documents he'd left. Interesting timing, Margaret observed after reviewing the papers. The State Banking Commission begins its formal investigation next week. Federal prosecutors have been interviewing former bank employees. This proposal would effectively settle matters before those investigations can determine criminal liability. Clever, Jack agreed, but also potentially beneficial for the community. Immediate compensation rather than years of uncertain legal battles. Property restoration guaranteed rather than subject to continued appeals. Emily nodded. We should bring this to everyone at tonight's meeting. This affects the whole community, not just us. By sunset, they had gathered at the Metal Yard office, which had become an unofficial headquarters for what locals now called the Safe Recovery Committee. Representatives from 24 affected families crowded into the space, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and cautious hope. As Emily presented Marshall's proposal, debate erupted immediately. Passionate arguments for acceptance, countered by equally fervent calls for pursuing justice through the courts. Some distrusted any offer from a marshal on principle. Others saw practical benefits in resolving matters quickly. As discussion continued, Emily slipped away to the east corner of the metal yard. The excavation site had been filled in, the safe removed to a secure facility, but the ancient digger remained, a silent witness to the extraordinary events that had unfolded here. The brass plate Margaret had given her matched perfectly with the mechanism on the digger's control panel. According to Margaret, her father had hinted that the safe wasn't the only thing hidden at the metal yard. There were other secrets, other records that might reveal even deeper truths about Riverdale's power structures. With the sun setting behind the distant hills, Emily inserted the plate into its matching socket, turning it slowly until she heard a soft click not in the digger itself, but from beneath it, a sound of machinery engaging. After decades of silence, the ground around the digger shifted almost imperceptibly, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a trapdoor, perfectly camouflaged within the surrounding soil. With rising excitement, Emily cleared away loose earth to expose a small metal hatch with a simple handle. It opened with surprising ease, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. Emily activated her phone's flashlight and peered down concrete steps, leading to what appeared to be a small underground room, a bunker of sorts constructed decades ago and forgotten. Descending carefully, she discovered a space approximately 8 feet square, its walls lined with metal shelving. Unlike the safe, this hidden room hadn't been designed to store valuables, but information. Dozens of document boxes, each labeled meticulously with dates spanning from the 1920s through the early 1980s. The first box Emily opened contained newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and photographs, all methodically organized to document the activities of Riverdale's prominent families. Not just the Marshalls, but the Harrisons, the Prestons, the Caldwells, names that still adorned the town's largest businesses, most imposing homes, and civic buildings. These weren't financial records like those in the safe, but something potentially more explosive, evidence of coordinated efforts to control local politics, manipulate land values, sideline economic competition, and maintain social hierarchies across generations. "My God," Emily whispered, realizing what she'd discovered. This wasn't just about one bank robbery or one corrupt banker. This was a comprehensive archive documenting how a small group of families had engineered Riverdale's development for their benefit, determining who prospered and who struggled, who had opportunities and who was systematically excluded. The implications were staggering. If the safe contents had disrupted Riverdale's understanding of its past, these documents could transform its future, forcing a complete reassessment of power structures that had persisted for a century. As Emily climbed back to the surface, document box in hand, she found Margaret waiting beside the digger, a knowing expression on her weathered face. "You found it," the older woman stated rather than asked. "Did you know what was down there?" Emily questioned. Margaret nodded slowly. "Not specifically, but my father said your uncle helped them construct a truth vault in the early 1980s, a place to preserve evidence they'd both collected over decades, evidence that went far beyond the bank robbery." "This is bigger than the Marshalls," Emily realized, glancing at the box in her arms. "This involves all the old families, all the power structures in Riverdale," Margaret confirmed. "Which is why your uncle was so careful. The safe was just a beginning proof of concept, you might say. Once people accepted that truth about the past, they might be ready for harder truths about the present." Back at the office, the meeting was concluding. Most families were cautiously optimistic about Marshall's proposal, seeing it as a foundation for negotiation rather than a final settlement. They had formed a committee to draft a counteroffer, engaging legal counsel experienced in historical restitution cases. As the gathering dispersed, Emily pulled Jack and several key community leaders aside, sharing her discovery of the underground document room and its potentially explosive contents. "We need to proceed carefully," advised Teresa Ramirez, recently elected to the town council. These documents could provide critical leverage in negotiations with not just the Marshalls, but all the families who've controlled Riverdale for generations. But releasing everything at once could create chaos. "We should establish an independent historical commission," suggested Professor Watkins from the State University. "Scholars and community representatives working together to process these records properly, ensure their authentication, and determine appropriate timing for public disclosure." Through the night and into the next morning, Emily worked with this core group to develop a strategic approach to both Marshall's offer and the newly discovered archives. By dawn, they had outlined a framework that balanced immediate needs for restitution with longer-term goals for structural change in Riverdale's economic and social landscape. The town hall was packed beyond capacity for Marshall's press conference. National media had returned, sensing the next chapter in a story that had captivated audiences across the country. Edward Marshall, impeccably dressed as always, approached the podium with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to controlling narratives. His announcement largely matched what he'd shared with Emily: the establishment of a restoration fund, the return of wrongfully acquired properties, structural changes to the bank's governance. The audience received it with cautious applause, recognizing both the significance of the concessions and their inadequacy in addressing generations of economic injustice. When he concluded, Marshall surprised everyone by inviting Emily to the podium. "Ms. Cooper's actions set these events in motion," he acknowledged. "It seems appropriate that she share the community's response to our proposal." Emily hadn't prepared formal remarks, but as she took her place at the microphone, she found clarity in what needed to be said. "What happened in Riverdale wasn't simply one banker's crime," she began. "It was the foundation for systems of advantage and disadvantage that have shaped this community for nearly a century, determining who had opportunities and who faced barriers, who accumulated wealth and who struggled to survive." She paused, making eye contact with community members throughout the room. "Mr. Marshall's proposal is a meaningful first step toward addressing historical wrongs. But true healing requires more than financial compensation. It requires fundamentally reimagining how this community operates, who has voice in decisions, and how we build a future where prosperity is accessible to all." Emily revealed the discovery of the additional archives, explaining the formation of a historical commission to process these records responsibly. "These documents will help us understand not just what happened, but why and how similar patterns might persist in less visible ways today." She concluded by announcing the community's counter-proposal acceptance of Marshall's financial terms with additional provisions for inclusive economic development, educational opportunities for families historically excluded from advancement, and transfer of the metal yard to a community trust that would preserve it as both historical site and ongoing research center. "My uncle was labeled eccentric for believing in buried truths," Emily said. "But his persistence gave this community an opportunity few ever receive: the chance to confront hidden history, to acknowledge harm, and to build something better together. What matters now is what we choose to do with that opportunity." In the weeks and months that followed, Riverdale began a transformation more profound than anyone could have anticipated when Emily first discovered that brass key beneath the office floorboards. The negotiated settlement provided immediate relief to families who had struggled for generations, while the Historical Commission's careful work illuminated systems of privilege that had remained invisible to those who benefited from them. The metal yard, once dismissed as a collection of worthless junk, became a center for community reconciliation, a place where difficult conversations about the past created possibility for a more equitable future. The digger remained as a monument, marked with a simple plaque: "Truth, like treasure, is often buried deepest where no one thinks to look." 1 year after the safe's discovery, Emily stood at the edge of her expanded farmland, watching as community members gathered for the groundbreaking of the Riverdale Agricultural Education Center, a collaborative initiative that would provide training and resources for small farmers competing in a market dominated by corporate agriculture. The Cooper farm, nearly lost to foreclosure, had become a symbol of resilience and renewal. The western fields, restored through historical documentation, now hosted experimental sustainable farming practices that blended traditional knowledge with modern techniques. Margaret joined her, leaning more heavily on her cane these days, but still sharp-eyed and determined. "Your uncle would be proud," she observed. "Not just of finding the safe, but of what you've helped build afterward." "I was ready to sell everything and walk away," Emily admitted. "If I hadn't found that key, someone would have eventually," Margaret replied. "Truth has a way of surfacing given enough time. The question is always whether we're ready to receive it when it does." As the ceremonial first shovel broke ground on the new center, applause rippled through the gathered crowd. Among them stood Edward Marshall and his daughter Rebecca, their presence still uncomfortable for many, but increasingly accepted as part of the community's complex healing process. The metal yard that Emily had reluctantly inherited had yielded far more than its market value. It had unearthed buried history, challenged entrenched power, and created space for a community to reimagine itself. The journey that began with a hidden key had unlocked not just a forgotten safe, but possibilities for transformation that would continue long after the immediate discoveries faded from headlines. That evening, as sunset painted the autumn sky in brilliant oranges and golds, Emily returned to the office where everything had started. The space had been preserved exactly as her uncle had left it, his meticulous notes, collections of curiosities, and hand-drawn maps now understood as the work not of an eccentric obsessive, but of a patient truth-seeker. On the desk sat a framed photograph of her uncle and father as young men, arms around each other's shoulders, standing proudly before the metal yard entrance. Before the estrangement, before fear and protection drove them apart, two brothers who had chosen different paths in response to the same buried truths, one to confront, one to avoid. Emily touched the frame gently, grateful for the unexpected inheritance that had connected her not just to her family's past, but to its purpose. The brass key that had started everything now hung on a simple chain around her neck, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable discoveries come disguised as burdens we initially resist. Outside, the community continued gathering for the evening celebration. Inside this quiet space, Emily took a moment to honor the journey from reluctant heir to community catalyst, from struggling farmer to caretaker of transformative truth. The path forward remained challenging, full of difficult conversations and uncomfortable reckonings. But it was a path illuminated by truth finally brought into the light, by justice delayed, but not ultimately denied. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.